famous one. This case involves sexual assault, murder, and sexual assault of minors. So I would recommend clicking off this video if any of those topics are going to make you feel uncomfortable. The case that I'm going to be talking about today is the Fred and Rose West case. In the UK, it is a very, very well-known case, and as far as I'm aware, it is well-known around the world. So, all of the details of this case are very graphic. I have got my notes over here, and I have scripted it, so hopefully it's easy enough for you to understand, and hopefully you'll be able to relax while you're listening to this. So, I'm just going to get straight into the video. I really hope you enjoy. Frederick Walter Stephen West was born on the 29th of September 1941 to Daisy Hannah Hill and Walter Stephen West. At the time of Fred's birth, the family lived in a village called Markham in Herefordshire. The Wests were a family of farm workers who had lived in extreme poverty and at times would live only off of their own crops. Daisy sadly had suffered a high number of miscarriages, some of which had occurred prior to Fred's birth, and by 1951 she had given birth to 8 children, but only 6 had survived. Throughout his childhood, Fred was thought to be a mummy's boy. He had quite a strong bond with his mother, where his other siblings seemed to be closer to their father. Throughout his school years, it was apparent to both his teachers and his classmates that Fred was of below average intelligence. His classmates would refer to him as being dim and lethargic. His appearance was always quite unkempt and scruffy, although he wouldn't do well with ordinary classes. He was quite good with woodwork and art. There were a number of different allegations made by Fred about abuse and sexuality in his family. He had claimed that he was introduced to sex at a very young age by his mother. He was apparently 12 years old. He had also made a claim that during his teen years his father introduced him to bestiality. He had actually gone as far to describe how his father would teach him how to hold the animals in a certain way. Fred also claimed that throughout his childhood his father had been having incestuous relationships with his sisters. This claim has since been denied by his brother Doug, but Fred has used it as the reasoning for his sexual relationship with his sister afterwards. In 1957, Fred and his brother John were regularly frequenting a youth club in a nearby town. Both of them had the intention of attracting female attention, and Fred was known to have been quite aggressive. He would be quite abrupt and, without warning, start to grope whoever he was talking to at the time. The following year, not long after his 17th birthday, Fred was involved in an accident on his motorcycle. He had recently got this for his birthday, and the accident had left him with a fractured skull, a broken arm, and a broken leg. He remained in a coma for 7 days, and for the first several months of his recovery, he was required to walk with braces. Following the accident, he had developed a severe fear of hospitals, and he was also prone to fits of rage. 2 years after the accident, Fred then suffered a further head injury when a girl who he had groped had punched him, sending him falling 2 floors from a fire escape. He required a metal plate to repair his skull, and there had been quite a lot of damage to his frontal lobe, causing further anger issues. In June 1961, Fred was arrested for raping and impregnating his younger sister Kitty. She was 13 years old at the time, and at the time of his arrest, Fred admitted to the police that he had been abusing girls since his early teens. His trial went ahead on the 7th of November 1961, but Kitty refused to testify at the trial. Fred had actually said to the police when he was asked about abusing his sister, "Doesn't everybody Catherine Bernadette Costello, also known as Rena. Catherine had recently moved to England from her home in Lanarkshire in Scotland. At the time of the two meeting, Catherine was pregnant, and the father of her unknown child was an Asian bus driver, and it's believed that the reason for her relocation is that her family didn't approve of the biracial child, and she had run away from her family. The two had married in November of the same year, and the only person in attendance was Fred's younger brother, John. John was also known to have been a sexual predator and was later arrested for sex crimes. At the time of their marriage, the two had initially moved in with Fred's aunt before settling in Glasgow. Rena's daughter, Charmaine, was born in March of 1963. In July of 1964, Rena gave birth to Fred's first child, a daughter called Anne-Marie. The marriage between Fred and Rena was extremely toxic, with Fred admitting that he had engaged in a number of different affairs whilst he was married. Rena had started her own affair with a man who had remained part of her life throughout her marriage to Fred. The children's nanny, Isla McNeil, and her friend 16-year-old Anne McFall had quite a close relationship with the Wests, and when Fred decided to rent a caravan in Gloucester in December 1965, the two had moved in with him. This was following an incident where Fred had run over and killed a boy in Glasgow. For fear of backlash by the locals, Fred decided to move after he was cleared of any wrongdoing. Fred's relationship with all three women was extremely abusive. It was also described as sadistic. He had begun sexually abusing Charmaine and had convinced Rena that she should take part in prostitution in order to support the family. Fred was also emotionally and physically abusive towards his own daughter, Anne-Marie. It's claimed that he would cage the two girls up in the bottom bunk of a bunk bed, and that they wouldn't be allowed out until he had left for work. Rena and Isla McNeil had developed a plan to get away from Fred, and the plan involved the man that Rena was having an affair with, and McNeil's boyfriend. The plan was that they were going to take the two women away to Scotland, and when they attempted to carry out their plan, Fred had been made aware by Anne McFall, who was smitten by Fred. She was in love with him, and Fred was able to stop the women taking the children back to Scotland. Charmaine and Anne-Marie had remained with Fred and Anne McFall, while Rena and Isla McNeil returned to Scotland. Rena had spent the next few years in Scotland and came back and forward so that she could be a part of the children's lives. In July 1967, Anne McFall, who was 18 years old at the time and 8 months pregnant with Fred's child, disappeared. The following month, Rena West moved back into the home with Fred, and it was short-lived. Rena left again, and the children were left with Fred, who would at times put them into foster care. Rena returned to England in 1971 with the intent of confronting Fred about the welfare of her children and his abuse. She visited his family in Muchmarkle, and Fred's sister-in-law provided Rena with Fred's address. So she left the village and went to find Fred. This was the last time that Rena had been seen alive. Her body was later discovered in a field in Muchmarkle, and she had been strangled and sexually assaulted, and her body had been dismembered. In early 1969, Fred met a girl called Rosemary Letts, who would later become known as Rose West. The couple's initial meeting was at a bus stop in Gloucester. Rose was 15 at the time and Fred was 28. Fred became infatuated by Rose and was quite persistent in his attempts to take her out on a date. Rose had refused his offers on multiple occasions, originally repulsed by Fred and his unkempt appearance. Fred was known to have been quite charming when he wanted to be, so using this and trying to get sympathy from gift inside for her. A few moments later, Fred appeared in the door and asked her to meet him at 8 p.m. that evening at the local pub. On this occasion, Rose agreed to go out with Fred, and from that moment on, that is when the relationship of one of Britain's most infamous and cruel couples began. Rosemary Pauline Letts was born on the 29th of November 1953. She was born in Northam in Devon. She was the fifth child of an electrician named William Bill Andrew Letts and his wife Daisy Gwendolyn Fuller. Two more siblings were to follow Rose. Rose's mother Daisy had suffered quite badly with depression, and during her pregnancy with Rose, she had been undergoing electroshock therapy. It's also believed that this was taking place right up until the point where Daisy was due to give birth with Rose. So, it's widely believed that this may have impacted on Rose's development in the womb. As a child growing into a teenager, Rose did not do well at school. She was prone to daydreaming as a child, and she was described as being quite moody. During her teenage years, Rose's parents separated, and she initially moved in with her mother. This only lasted for a short period of time, and when she was 16 years old, Rose moved in with her father in a village called Bishop's Cleeve in Gloucestershire. It's believed that throughout Rose's life, her father Bill had suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. The upbringing in the Letts household had been extremely strict, where the children were not allowed to play outside of the walls of the garden. There had also been speculation that Bill had made his daughters clean the carpets with a toothbrush. Bill was physically violent towards both his wife and some of the children, but it's believed that Rose did not bear the brunt of a lot of his physical violence, and this was either because she was not doing so well in school and he thought there might be something wrong with her, or that she was being bullied and called chubby, but it could also have been because Bill was sexually abusing Rose. When Rose moved in with her father at the age of 16, it's believed that the incestuous relationship continued. During her time living in the house with her father and her siblings, Rose had exhibited other strange behaviours. She would walk around the house completely naked and just in front of her brothers and her father. She had also been abusing her younger brothers from around the age of 13. So, shortly after Fred and Rose met for their first date at the local pub, they quickly started an intense relationship which went on to be deadly. Rose would regularly stay in the caravan that Fred was living in at the time, and she was soon introduced to Fred's two daughters, Charmaine and Anne-Marie. At the start, Rose treated the girls well. She was kind of like a mother figure, and she would regularly want to take them out on days out, and she had become a childminder for the girls while Fred was working. She quickly became a full-time nanny and quit her job, unbeknownst to her parents, and Fred would pay Rose the same wages so that her parents wouldn't find out that she had quit her job. Both of Rose's parents were not happy with the relationship with Fred. They didn't like him, they thought he was arrogant, and her mother actually concluded that he was a pathological liar. They forbade Rose from seeing Fred, and when she disobeyed him, they contacted social services, and Rose was placed into a home for troubled teens. When Rose was 16, she moved into Fred's flat with him and his two daughters, and shortly after this, she was examined by a police surgeon following another attempt to get her away from Fred by her father. The surgeon found that Rose was actually pregnant. It's widely believed that this first child, Heather, who was the firstborn of Fred and Rose, may have actually been the product of Rose's incestuous relationship with her father. actually told the girl and her mother that Charmaine had gone to live with her mother, and good riddance to her. After Charmaine's body was found, forensics showed that she had actually died between the 15th of June, when she had visited Fred in prison, and the 24th of June, when he was released. Charmaine's body had been buried in the backyard of the West's flat on Midland Road after Fred's release from prison, and when it was found, it was noted that a number of the child's bones were missing. These were believed to have been kept as keepsakes. Fred and Rose went on to get married on the 29th of January 1972, and months after their wedding, Rose was pregnant again with their second child. Around this time, the Wests moved from Midland Road to 25 Cromwell Street, which would later famously become known as the House of Horrors. On the 1st of June 1972, Fred and Rose's second daughter, Mae West, was born. Mae has actually released a book detailing a lot of what went on in the West's house throughout her upbringing, and I'm reading it at the minute. It's actually very good, but I didn't really want to detail any of the information from the book because I haven't read very much just yet, but I may do a follow-up video if that would be something that you'd be interested in. Not long after giving birth to Mae, Rose began working as a prostitute. All of her work was carried out at home, and Fred had installed a number of peepholes into the room where Rose was carrying out her work. This was so that he could watch from a different room. Rose was also engaging in just casual sex with male and female lodgers in the house, and a lot of these activities were quite violent, and it was apparent that both Fred and Rose enjoyed the control aspect of what they were doing. The couple would also take part in threesomes where they took pleasure in inflicting pain on their partner. They actually later started to use photographs of bestiality and child abuse in all of their encounters, and it's also been noted that during this time Rose was continuing her incestuous relationship with her father. By 1983, Rose had given birth to 8 children, and at least 3 of them were not biologically Fred West's children, although he had raised them as his own children, when the term being raised is used loosely. All of the children in the West household suffered from extreme abuse. Throughout their lives, it was physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. The West children were physically punished if they didn't complete their chores, mostly by Rose. Mae West had actually noted in her book that a lot of times their father would need to pull Rose off of the children and try and calm her down. Within a 20-year period, there were 31 admissions into casualty of the children, and none of these were reported to social services. This detail is actually something that I've taken from Mae West's book. So she had detailed that shortly after moving to 25 Cromwell Street, the children were made to sleep in the cellar. This meant that in the evenings they had to go out the front door of the house and walk around to the cellar door, and they were put in their beds by Rose, and before she would leave, Rose would unscrew the bulb from the ceiling so that the children couldn't act up or play around with the light on. This same cellar is where the sexual assault of Anne-Marie West began. The abuse started when Anne-Marie was 8 years old. Anne-Marie was also forced into prostitution when she was 13 years of age. Fred and Rose would tell the clients that she was 16. The first serious charge against the Wests came after an attack on the children's nanny, Caroline Owens. She's now known as Caroline Roberts. Owens had started working for the Wests as a live-in nanny in 1972, after meeting them while she was hitchhiking. Fred had started to become quite inappropriate with her, and she started to feel uncomfortable and wanted to leave, so she left. The Wests had come up with a plan to abduct Caroline, which which they did. They went and met her, or they came across her out in the street and said that they wanted to apologise. They had put Caroline in the car with them, and she believed that maybe, yes, they were apologising to her, but instead they actually then kidnapped her, took her back to 25 Cromwell Street, where she was raped and beaten on a number of occasions. Fred had actually threatened her with being buried under the paving stones of Gloucester. Caroline, to appease the Wests, had started to agree that she would work for them again, and thankfully, while she was out on errands with Rose, she was able to get away. Caroline and her mother reported the incident to the police, and Fred and Rose were arrested and charged with assault, indecent assault, and actual bodily harm, and rape. The trial went ahead in 1973, but Caroline could not bring herself to testify, and the Wests were let off with a fine of £50 each. So the investigation into the Wests did not start until 1992, and it was after one of the West children had told a friend that she was receiving of the abuse that she was receiving at the hands of her father. The friend had informed her mother, who then contacted the police. Fred and Rose were arrested and charged with rape and child cruelty, but again the charges were dropped because the witnesses did not want to testify. With the allegations of abuse and the disappearance of the couple's daughter Heather, the police started to become suspicious of the pair and decided to look into Heather's disappearance. Heather had been missing since 1987, and the police had discovered that Fred and Rose would threaten their children with being buried under the paving stones like Heather if they mispaved. An excavation of the property was conducted by the police in 1994. This was at 25 Cromwell Street, in search of Heather. Fred and Rose continued to deny these allegations, with Fred actually threatening to sue the police for the damage that they were causing to his property. This was until the police had made the discovery of bones under the patio. Fred West admitted to the murder of Heather West, but he continued throughout the investigation to deny that Rose had any involvement. The following month, more human remains were discovered under the patio, and Fred willingly provided the police with details of 9 further murders, which included Rena Costello and Anne McFall. During the trial, it's been noted that Fred was snubbed by Rose. She denied all advances that he had tried to communicate with her. On the 1st of January 1995, Fred West committed suicide. This was in his cell in Winston Green Prison. Rose West has continued to deny any involvement in any of these crimes, but thanks to the testimony of Caroline Roberts, the evidence against Rose for the murder of Charmaine West, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation by the judge that she never be released. In October 1996, 25 Cromwell Street was demolished and made into a pathway. Since the trial and Rose's conviction, 3 of her children have released books, all detailing the abuse that they received inside the West's home. I will detail the books in the description below. Quite recently, there was a newer development in the West case, where following Fred's interview with his appropriate adult and Rose's interview with a solicitor, a private investigation has been taking place into locating more possible victims. Rose had claimed in her interview that there could possibly be another 20 victims. She had also mentioned that the murders had taken place between 25 Cromwell Street and a farm. She had actually also said that Fred's brother John was involved in a lot of these murders. So all of this is being looked into, and there was quite recently a documentary done by Trevor McDonald where they had discovered of this